Hello and welcome to Witch Hunt Victim Stories. I'm Josh Hutchinson, and today I'm going to talk about John Procter. You know him and love him from the Crucible, but the John Procter you learn about today is not quite the John Procter you know from Arthur Miller's writing, which is highly dramatized and does not stick to the historical narrative, but still makes for great play and movie for evoking the emotions of the witch crisis. For one thing, John Procter did not have a romance with Abigail Williams. If Arthur Miller wanted to insert an illicit relationship into his play, he could easily have chosen John Proctor's own servant, Mary Warren, who was about 20, rather than Abigail Williams, who in reality was 11 years old. However, a relationship with the minister's niece was certainly a dramatic move for the play and the movie. The real John Procter was, going by accounts of his speech and behavior in the surviving documents, a stern man, but forgiving. As we'll discuss, he may have administered severe corporal punishment to Mary Warren. On the other hand, John Procter was eloquent, intelligent, and purposeful in his letters from prison to powerful men in the colony. He also forgave Giles Corey for possibly setting fire to one of his properties and stealing his wood. Born in England in about 1632, John later immigrated to Massachusetts with his parents, John and Martha, who settled in Ipswich. In 1650, the elder John Procter served on a trial jury at a court which ordered John Bradstreet whipped for lying. The court records do not give any details on the nature of those lies, but we do know Bradstreet was soon talking about encounters with the supernatural. He was later arrested for suspicion of witchcraft in 1652, but found guilty only of lying that he had read in a magic book, and that he had heard a voice asking him what work he had for it. Now, our John Procter, the second one, married Martha White and Lady Martha Jackson in about 1652. Then he married a second time in 1662, this time to Elizabeth Thorndike. Between his first two wives, John had 5 kids. In 1666, John rented a farm from Emmanuel Downing, a brother-in-law of John Winthrop. This farm was in Salem Farms, and John Procter would reside here with his family until his arrest for witchcraft in 1692. This Downing farm was outside the Salem Village parish line, and the Proctors attended worship services in Salem town, even after the village was granted its own parish status in 1672. John married again in 1674. Whether he knew it or not, his bride was the granddaughter of a woman who had previously been suspected of being a witch. John's third wife, Elizabeth Bassett, was born in Lynn between 1647 and 1651, according to different sources that I found. She was the daughter of William and Sarah Bassett and granddaughter of Anne Burt, who was accused of witchcraft in November 1669 at a court on which John Hathorne's father, William, sat as a judge. No action was recorded as a result of this hearing. John and his second wife, Elizabeth, had 5 children prior to 1692. Meaning John had a total of 10 children, some of them adults, at the time of his and Elizabeth's trials. In 1692, on March 6th, Ann Putnam Jr. accused Elizabeth Procter of bewitching her on March 3rd. She simply could not recognize her on the 3rd, but did recognize her at worship service in the meeting house on the 6th. However, no complaint was filed against Elizabeth for nearly a month. On March 25th, on the way from his home to fetch his maid Mary Warren in the village, John Procter stopped for a drink and spoke with Samuel Sibley, husband of the Mary Sibley who helped Tituba and John Indian bake the witch cake. John said he would rather have paid Mary than have her attend a court proceeding. He said that when Mary started having fits, he put her to work at the spinning wheel until she was better. He had threatened to beat her if she did it again, and now he planned to thresh the devil out of her. John said the afflicted girl should hang, or else they'd have everyone else hang as a witch. Samuel Sibley reported all of this to Samuel Parris. Mercy Lewis accused Elizabeth Procter on March 26th. Then on March 28th, an unidentified afflicted girl made light of accusing Elizabeth Procter and was called out by Hannah Ingersoll. In early April, Stephen Bitford overnighted at the home of James Darling, who was Mercy Lewis's uncle by marriage. About midnight, he was partially awake when Rebecca Nurse and Elizabeth Procter appeared to him, and he felt pain in his neck. Also in early April, Benjamin Gold saw the Proctors and several others in his room at night. One day, Mary Warren posted a request for prayers of thanksgiving on the village meeting house post. Several prayers read these aloud to the congregation on April 3rd. John Procter opposed bills for public prayer. Mary Warren accused Elizabeth Procter of dragging her out of bed the night that Mary posted the thank you note. Elizabeth supposedly told Mary that she, Elizabeth, was indeed a witch. Mary Warren also said John Procter had bullied and threatened her and made her sign the book. John Procter had confided in Mary Warren about trouble with his wife and consulted with her about a land deal. On April 4th and 6th, Abigail Williams complained of John Procter. Elizabeth Procter was accused of witchcraft by an afflicted girl at Ingersoll's Tavern who claimed to see Elizabeth Procter's specter and said she was a witch and should hang. April 4th, 1692, Jonathan Walcott and Nathaniel Ingersoll finally lodged a formal complaint against Elizabeth Procter. After coordinating with the government in Boston, the magistrates waited until Friday, April 8th to issue the warrant, which instructed the constable to bring Elizabeth to Salem Town's meeting house on Monday the 11th. The delay in issuing the warrant and holding the examination in Salem Town rather than Salem Village were both because several dignitaries were going to visit. So on April 11th, 1692, Elizabeth was examined after Sarah Cloyce was. The local Salem magistrates, John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, likely presided, but Deputy Governor Thomas Danforth and 4 members of the Governor's Council attended: Samuel Sewell, James Russell, Isaac Addington, and Samuel Appleton. Sewell would later be a judge on the Court of Oyer and Terminer, which first convened at the beginning of June 1692 to hear and determine witchcraft cases. At the time of her examination, Elizabeth Procter was newly pregnant, but may not have even known it yet, as it was very early, with child number 6. This 6th child would save the mother's life. More on that in a bit. We often hear of the afflicted girls, but by this time, 3 adult women were present among the afflicted, as was John Indian. At first, none of the afflicted persons were able to speak when asked to identify Elizabeth Procter, but then John Indian said Elizabeth Procter had come to him spectrally, wearing only her shift, at the parsonage, pinching, biting, and choking. Under repeated questioning, he confirmed Elizabeth's identity twice more. John Procter, who was in the audience, told everyone he would beat the devil out of John Indian. Soon the girls began to recover and chimed in on Elizabeth's guilt. Abigail Williams and Ann Putnam Jr. tried to strike Elizabeth, but Abigail's fist magically unclenched midair. When her fingers brushed at Procter's hood, she screamed that her fingers were burned. During the examination, the girls would telegraph their plays, announcing that one or more would have fits just before they did. In one incident, the feet of Bathsheba Pope, an aunt of Benjamin Franklin, rose off the ground after the girl said she would levitate. During the questioning, Elizabeth said, "I take God in heaven to be my witness that I know nothing of it, no more than the child unborn." After a while, the girls claimed Elizabeth's specter was perched on a beam. Danforth demanded John Procter say what he thought about things. Before he could answer, Abigail Williams pointed to 2 older women afflicted and said John Procter was about to attack them. They twisted in agony, so Danforth said that the girls had caught him out. After the examination, both Elizabeth and John Procter were taken into custody. The next day, the afflicted saw John Procter's specter at Ingersoll's, and the real Proctors were sent to Boston jail with the Goods, Rebecca Nurse, Martha Corey, and Sarah Cloyce. Giles Corey and John Procter had an up-and-down relationship. John accused Giles of attempting to burn down a Procter home. Giles, in return, sued John for defamation. Later, John accused Giles of stealing some of his wood, but both men made peace over drink. On May 4th, 1692, the day George Burroughs was brought from Maine into Salem, Mary Warren said that the magistrates might as well listen to Eliza Keyser's distracted daughter as any of the afflicted girls. In court herself within a week, she sang a different tune. According to Stacy Schiff in The Witches, Salem 1692, quote, "She would prove the most sensational witness for the prosecution. She plucked pins from her body. She spat blood in the meeting house. Her tongue protruded from her mouth for so long it turned black. Her legs locked together and could not be separated by the strongest of men. The court reporter did not elaborate on this unconventional intercession. Here were grown men attempting to pry apart a 20-year-old girl's knees. End quote. Elizabeth Procter was accused by Mary Lacey Jr. of handing out communion at a witch meeting. On July 23rd, John Procter composed a petition 2 days after the Carrier Boys offered their rueful accounts. He had questioned 5 new confessors himself, and they all admitted they'd lied. He wrote about why the Carrier Boys had confessed, being bound neck and heels, as were his own sons. John Procter wrote to 5 top ministers in Boston. He knew his fellow inmates were innocent people and were not receiving fair trials. John said the magistrates behaved like popish inquisitors. Later in jail, Procter asked Nicholas Noyes, Salem minister, to pray with him, but Noyes refused because Procter had not confessed. John and Elizabeth Procter were tried in August. The surviving testimony largely implicates Elizabeth and not John. They were both found guilty. 2 petitions circulated on their behalf. One went to Boston, and another to the Court of Oyer and Terminer. John Wise, minister at Ipswich, wrote the petition that was sent to Boston. He stated that the devil may impersonate innocent people. He said the Proctors were decent people and churchgoers. 32 people signed this petition. 20 more people signed the petition that went to the General Court in Boston. In this document, they wrote, "We whose names are underwritten, having several years known John Procter and his wife, do testify that we never heard or understood that they were ever suspected to be guilty of the crime now charged upon them, and several of us, being their near neighbors, do testify that to our apprehension they lived Christian life in their family and were ever ready to help such as stood in need of their help." That week, John Procter rewrote his will. In his will, he gave his body unto decent burial at the discretion of my executors. Massachusetts Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton sentenced the Proctors John Willard, George Jacob Sr., Martha Carrier, and George Burroughs to hang. John Procter was hanged August 19th. Stoughton had granted Elizabeth a stay due to her pregnancy, which would have been about 4 months along at the time. John Procter behaved with great dignity at the hanging, according to the report we get from Robert Califf, and he and John Willard forgave everyone who acted against them in the witch hunt, moving onlookers to tears. Following the hanging, their bodies were simply thrown into gaps in the rocks at Proctor's Ledge in Salem. But tradition says John Procter was reburied on his property. With John Procter dead and Elizabeth still in jail, everything important was taken away from the children, including their food and dishes. On January 27, 1693, Elizabeth Procter gave birth in prison to a son, who she named John after his father. Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton signed a death warrant for Elizabeth and 7 others who had been convicted but not hanged. He scheduled the hanging for February 1st, but on January 31st, Governor Phipps reprieved Elizabeth and the others at the last minute. After the witch trials, Elizabeth Procter was in dispute with John Procter's children over her right to an inheritance. One issue was that, having been convicted of felony and condemned to die, her conviction and sentence remained on the colony's books, rendering her dead in the eyes of the law through what is known as attainder, which also stripped her of her property rights and her civil rights, which were both already limited as a woman. On May 27, 1696, Elizabeth Procter petitioned the General Court to recover that which of right by law I ought to have for my necessary supply and support. She referenced a prenuptial agreement she had made with John in writing. In 1699, Elizabeth remarried to a man named Daniel Richards. In 1700, Thorndyke Procter, son of John Procter and Elizabeth Thorndyke, purchased the Downing farm from Emmanuel Downing's grandson. Elizabeth Procter was included in a March 2, 1703 petition by Abigail and Francis Faulkner to clear names. This petition was signed by 21 people. Elizabeth's attainder was finally reversed on May 26, 1703, along with the attainders of Abigail Faulkner and Sarah Wardwell. On July 8, 1703, 12 ministers petitioned the governor and the general court to do something to clear all the names of those who had suffered as a result of the witch trials. But it took 8 years to finally have John's attainder and conviction reversed on October 17, 1711, along with those of 21 other sufferers. The act to reverse the attainders blamed the witch hunt on the influence and energy of the evil spirits, so great at that time, acting in and upon those who were the principal accusers, witnesses proceeding so far as to cause a prosecution to be had of persons of known and good reputation. I believe we should do better and issue an apology based on the reality that humans committed errors when confronted with fear. If you agree, please visit MassachusettsWitchTrials.org to learn more about the Massachusetts Witch Hunt Justice Project. In 1712, the Massachusetts government made restitution payments to Elizabeth Procter, now Elizabeth Richards, Benjamin Procter, John Procter, Elizabeth Procter Vary, Martha Procter Joyne, Mary Procter, Thorndike Procter, William Procter, Joseph Procter, Samuel Procter, Sarah Procter, Elizabeth Procter Jr., and Abigail Procter. John and Elizabeth Procter have been immortalized by Arthur Miller, but their legacy carries on in more important ways as well. Through their many descendants, and in stone in 3 memorials in Salem and Danvers, Massachusetts. You may have even seen their farm on HGTV's Farmhouse Fixer. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Witch Hunt. Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.